Yeah, welcome everyone to day 3 of EA Global Summit 2021. This session is by Stephen Maguire from Sparx Services Australia, presenting the session about repository updates and administrations made easy with model add-in recipes. So quickly handing over the session to you, Stephen. Please take it forward.
Thank you. Greetings and welcome everyone to this presentation on the repository updates and administration made easy with model add-ins. My name is Stephen Maguire. I'm the CEO and Principal Architect and Consultant at Sparx Services here in Melbourne, Australia. We're going to do something a little different today. I'm going to give you a peek inside our development models and show you how we develop the tools that we use to administer repositories. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at practical examples inside Enterprise Architect. And then we're going to ask you to join us later in creating administration recipes that everyone can use and enjoy. Briefly, the topics that we'll cover is a brief look at an opportunity or a modeling administration problem, a look at the current solutions, and then the repository extension framework solution to this problem, an overview of link.js and enumerables, and a summary of how we arrived at the solution, including the changing Sparx ecosystem, including tools such as Prolaborate, and a detailed look at the enumerables object and its power, and an overview of the execution model using a postman metaphor. So let's dive in. So here's an example problem. We have a modeler, a power modeler or an administrator, and what they say is that as a power modeler, I want to update the author for selected elements. I want to change the author based on the element type, the stereotype, and status. So if we try to do this Enterprise Architect through the user interface, we would go to the project authors, the people's window, and we can't through here change the authors en masse. Effectively, the authors are stamped onto objects as they are created. If we go to the properties window, we could only change an author for a particular item, a diagram, or an element at a time. So how would we find the elements? Running a search would help us, but it has some limitations. And then how would we update each element? Well, traditionally, if we looked at scripting, which is what a lot of people use to manipulate models, this is not a script for that particular problem, but it shows you the kind of things that you might be used to scripting. It's a bit confronting certainly for non-programmer or retired programmer types, people that have moved on to other jobs. And there are lots of structures in there, for loops and control structures and if statements and conditional statements. So let's have a look at the repository extension framework solution to this problem. So we have this object called the enumerables. Please don't worry about the syntax at the moment. It might all look a little bit cryptic, but I can assure you by the end of the session, you'll have a much better understanding of what's going on. Some of you, in fact, may already use the enumerables either in C# or JavaScript. Essentially, what we're doing is we're telling this engine that we want to select from the Enterprise Architect tree. So we have our cursor on something, we say we want to look at packages, elements, and diagrams. And then we traverse down the tree, selecting elements, and in this case, we want to look at the elements that each package is associated with, because each package has an associated element. We want to log some results, and then we want to use a where clause to restrict what we want to see. And in this case, we want where the type is class, the stereotype is utility, and the author is Isaac Newton. And then for each of those, we want to set a property called status. We want to set it to approved. This is a compact and intuitive, but extremely powerful notation. If you look underneath in the quite fine script, to get that onto one line, I've reduced the font size. I hope you can see that. But you can see that the whole thing can be done in a single line of code. We do it in the expanded form because it's much more maintainable. So we wouldn't recommend this method down the bottom, but it just shows you how compact that is. And effectively, the tree will walk through potentially millions of items in the tree and also the mathematical graph that the elements are connected with. So here's the practical demonstration. So let's have a look at this. We've organized these add-in methods into what we call cookbooks, and we're going to talk a lot about that in later on. What we're planning to do is to create a large number of cookbooks that will be useful for people with administration problems or opportunities, and they can use these cookbooks as the basis of creating the recipes in creating solutions. So let's jump in now and have a look at Enterprise Architect. And this is in Cookbook AO1, and all we want to do is change the status. So let's jump over to Enterprise Architect, and let's have a look here. I'll just close these windows for a minute, and I'll jump up to the navigation window here and open that. So this will be the starting point. You're probably familiar, if you're familiar with Enterprise Architect, you'll be familiar with these windows. So you're looking now at our development models that we use to create models to manipulate the repository. And we're going to look at these cookbooks. So we'll use the navigation models to drill down through some of these items. I'll close off this. We're going to go into cookbooks. The cookbooks are ordered into themes, into recipe themes. So we've got 2 themes here. And think about, cookbooks in the real world. You could have, a Mediterranean cookbook, or you could have an Italian cookbook, Italian food, or you could have a dinner party cookbook that had, covered all sorts of different recipes for a dinner party. And you can also have cookbooks for very specific things, such as, how to make a particular sauce, or how to work with pastry and baking. So lots of opportunities there. Let's go into this theme. We haven't named these yet, and that's why we want some contribution from people like yourselves in the community to figure out how we should organize these cookbooks. We've got some ideas, but we'd like to get your ideas. So cookbook 1, let's have a look in there, and we'll go down into this cookbook. So here we have a JavaScript add-in. Now, if you're not familiar with model add-ins, this is a relatively new part of Enterprise Architect, and it allows you to work much more in a much more rigorous way, creating programmatic extensions. The scripting environment has limitations, and in many ways leads to some sort of cottage industry, kind of work. It shouldn't, but it tends, because of the way that it's set up. It can't be version controlled, and there are all sorts of other things about the scripting environment. Don't get me wrong, it's a very powerful thing, and it's a very welcomed part of the tool, most certainly. But when you start to want to do more rigorous, manipulation of the model add-ins is a very powerful way to work. So here we have this model add-in. You can see a number of methods there, a number of attributes, and it's linking to this SS scripts library, which is a large library that contains all of the code for the repository extension framework. Now, let's just look at one of these items. We wanted to change the status. So we'll look in the recipe, and there's a status item there. So let's click on that, right mouse click and say edit internal code. This pops us into the coding window. So you'll notice this is not the scripting window. This is the full-blown coding window, where I can do things like hide line numbers and all sorts of things. In fact, Enterprise Architect itself is developed through this coding window. So let's have a look at our problem. We want to change the status, and so we've got it. The to status here is approved. We want to do that when the element or package is the from author is Isaac Newton, and the type is a class, and the from stereotype is a utility. Now, let's look at the way that we've got this organized. What we've done is we've created test rigs, and so we have a number of test rigs here, and I'll show you that now. So we have these test rigs, and they're all organized there, and that's part of how we test whether our add-ins are doing the right thing and fit for release into the field. Let's go in this element. If you know Enterprise Architect, we can go in here and say, let's find in all diagrams, and let's look at the test rig mappings. So here we have test rig mappings, and we're saying, let's have a look at our element there, change status, and it's linked to test rig number 1. So let's right mouse click on there and say, let's find that in the project browser. And there it is there. And let's have a look at test rig 1 and what's going on. So the test rig has been devised to test the action of the add-in and make sure it's doing the right thing. Let's have a look at this this diagram here, and it will explain a little bit as to what the model is set up. So we have a number of classes, and notice that they're nested inside each other. You can see that in the project in the browser, and you can see it also in the diagram. Some of these elements have got a utility stereotype. Some of them don't. Some of them have a name of Isaac Newton as the author. Some of them have Nikola Tesla as the author. So if we're expecting this to work, certainly the thing must be a class, and all of these things obey the class the class problem, and 3 of them are utilities. This one here, however, is not, even though it's by Isaac Newton. This utility one here is both the author is Isaac Newton, and it's a utility. So let's have a look. Now, I just, what we do with this, just using some of the machinery of Enterprise Architect, we're going to go to the design and make sure that we have the latest copy of this. So I'm going to close this diagram for a minute. So we use baselines to ensure that we can rerun the tests. So on test rig 001, we're going to go to the baseline window, and we're going to say, let's restore it to this baseline. So we'll restore that. That ensures that we've got the latest model that we can test with. That goes through a few windows opening up and doing the baseline comparison. That should all finish in a minute. Now we've got our test rig there. Let's go back and have a look at this and have a look at our diagram. And we can see here that these 2 elements have got proposed as the status, and we're wanting to change that to approved. So let's select that guy there. Let's go to our recipes, which come off the specialized ribbon. Here they are all over here. They're add-ins, and if we go to the manage add-ins, you can see that they've all been enabled, and the administrator group is the only group that has access to them. And it was cookbook number 1, and we were going to go to elements, and we're going to change the status. So let's do that. And before we do, let's just check our output window. It's all clear. So check the status, check the package, into elements, change, and we'll go for status there. You can see here in the output window, we're using a console timer and a console info or console info method to report the things that we've found. And so that was in the cookbook. Remember, we had a .log there, which was logging what we found. Let's go and have a look at the things and see whether this one's been changed to approved. It was proposed. This one here remains proposed because the author is Nikola Tesla and not the author that we specified as Isaac Newton. This one has changed because the author was Isaac Newton and it was a utility. This one should not have changed because even though it's written by Isaac Newton, doesn't have a stereotype. So let's that's a very quick look at an example. Let's go back to our presentation. So here's a very simple look at that code. We've got a header block, we've got some variable declarations, and we've got this enumerable section. And like I said, don't worry about that. We will cover that in detail in a minute. But you can see that the code is very compact and it's very powerful. And if there were 1 million elements in that repository, it would have updated 1 million of those elements. And the conditions we put in, weren't all of that sophisticated, all of that tricky, but we could have all sorts of incredibly tricky things. Show me the elements that only Wendy created between these 2 dates that are in this package that are attached to have a relationship to this other element. So lots and lots of possibilities there. But the syntax is relatively straightforward. A closer look at the enumerables. There's a mistake there on that slide. That's the enumerable object there. It shouldn't say log the result. That's the enumerable object. And here we say from the EA selection tree. This tree can contain any EA collection example method parameters, even though they don't appear in the tree. So any collection that we want to put in there, we can put into that EA selection tree. And the magic will happen. It will traverse the tree, and not only the tree, but the whole graph of the elements. Then we have a select that manipulates the returned items and says, okay, well, what do we want? Now, if you know anything about or know a little bit about Enterprise Architect, the package element is a little bit odd. It in the properties window, it has a status and has other properties. Those properties don't actually belong to the package. They belong to an element that's a surrogate to the package, and that itself is actually an element. And so what we're dealing with there is a package as a namespace and an element. Then we log the result using template literals. So if you're a bit of a JavaScript person, or you've been doing some modern coding, you'll know that this template literals allows us to substitute in basically a variable and uses these backticks, these back slashes there. We then restrict or filter the set of items where the type is equal to the from type and the author is equal to the from author. I left the stereotype out of this one just to fit it on the page, but that was there. And then we set the property to status. Now, this is using a framework object that simplifies coding. We have introduced this object because we want to ensure that that we simplify some of the properties. Most of the time, we don't touch any of the Enterprise Architect methods. We don't wrap them up, and there are occasions when it's easier to do this. Let's have a quick look at this, the first enumerables example. So here's an example. The distinct extension method returns a new collection of unique elements from the given collection. So we have a large number of examples that are in one of the recipe books, and we're going to have a look at a number of those now and just have a bit of a play with them, really, and just explore some of those. So we'll flick back over to Enterprise Architect, and let's just do a bit of a cleanup here with these things. It's very easy to get a lot of windows open, so let's just go close all. I'll just don't know why I closed my navigation window. I'll just open that up back again because that's kind of handy. The cookbook that we're going to look at, and we have a number of them up here, so let's have a quick look. Got this cookbook 2. Now this contains a lot of the standard link.js methods, and they're all implemented inside Enterprise Architect. So we've implemented all of those inside Enterprise Architect. The recipe book hasn't been finished. You'll notice that some of these range down, range 2 haven't been completed. So as I said a little bit earlier, we're giving you a look into our development environment, and what we're going to do is offer an invitation to people to join a community of power modelers or administrators, librarians, to start contributing. And it's going to be a kind of, we'll put up some problems. We'll have a forum set up in by early next week, and that's going to allow people to ask for a recipe, and then other people to provide that recipe. And what we'll do is we'll build up a whole bank of these things that, as a community of users, that we can all use together. So let's have a look at this. This distinct one was actually a set-based one. So again, we'll look at our output here, and we'll go back to that cookbook, and we'll say it was a set-based one, and it said distinct, the distinct array. Let's just run it and see what happens. Menu, distinct items, distinct array clicked. So let's go and look at that cookbook. It was cookbook number 2, and I think it will be in this theme 2. Cookbook number 2, and we'll look at the add-in codes. We're drilling down now into this add-in code, and you can see that there's a bunch of, quite a few methods in there. And let's have a look if we can find that method. So it's a set method. There it is there, set distinct array. Let's open it up and have a look at the code. Extremely straightforward code, nothing very simple about it, but incredibly powerful. We've got an example there of an array of numbers and an array of strings. And if you look at it, the code suddenly becomes very simple. This dot enumerable, so and then from colors, so from the thing, the data that we're selecting from, in this case, an array of strings, and then we apply this distinct method to that, log it, and force the result. So we would expect that red's repeated there a couple of times, and so is indigo. So in our result, we just get the distinct list. Now this is going to be very powerful. In this case, they're not things that we would manipulate in EA, and they've been included in here just to give you a very simple and soft introduction to these things. Later in other recipes, we'll do lots more interesting things, and arrays are a very useful thing in Enterprise Architect. Here we have another example here, choice. Let's just do that one, and we get this string array. We haven't looked at the data, but you can see the output of that. If we look in here, matches string, that was the one that we did there was a generating, and it was choice, so we could have a look at that, and that's the method there. So again, very simple. The array is in line with the the thing there, enumerable.choice, log and force it. We'll come back to the log and force, but they're the methods that actually execute. But before that, we're just kind of creating a plan of what we're going to do. But a whole bunch of things there. Let's have a look at one here a little bit lower. There's a regex one there. There's a JSON one there. I'm just looking for that at the moment. Let me have a look. Set distinct regex from object node list array. Example one, I can't see that one. I'll run it as the example anyway. Should be able to see it. I'm not seeing it there. Let's just run it anyway. I'm pretty sure that convert to JSON. Whoopsie daisy, missed the menu then. Convert to JSON, and we get that list there. So don't know why my eyes can't see that example there. It was definitely there somewhere. There we go, to JSON. So here we have an array of objects, JavaScript objects, and again, this time the output of the enumerables is going to go into a variable, and then we're going to execute that, and then convert the JSON to string to log it to the console. But you can see that's a useful function, and again, we'll have recipes that show how this would be useful inside Enterprise Architect. We've got ones that convert to XML as well. So there's a number of different things. We have a very rich XML parsing part of the repository as well. So that's kind of useful. But there's a whole lot of different ones here. Arrays by example. So ordering then by array. So let's have a quick look at that one. So it's an ordering one. It's a then by example. So let's run that. And we are able to order those by age ascending. So again, if you think about some of the problems that you'll have in Enterprise Architect and administration, you'll see that some of these things are going to be very useful. Let's go back to cookbook number 1, and so we'll close this. We'll close this page, or we'll go back on this page here, back to our themes, and go back into that, and we'll close this window that we've got open. Back into our themes, look at 1, and let's look at a couple of other things. I'd like this to be, kind of practical, where you can see what we're doing. So let's have a look at some of the other ones, slightly more complicated one. So here's an interesting one, authors by search. So we've got a standard way to change an author of an element. So let's have a look at this simple one here, and we'll launch the internal editor so we can see the code at the same time. Move the browser over a little, and here we have an example where we are just changing the author. It's very similar to the one that we looked at. We're writing out to the console using this template string method, and we've also someone's put a debug in here while they were working with it. As I said, you're coming into our development environment to put a console info in there saying boo. So that's an example, quite simple. Let's have a look at another one. This is using search, so it's a very similar thing. But here we are doing a from repository get element by query. So the from clause is the source of the elements is coming from the query. So we're actually running like a query, like when you press model search to find the elements. We're running that, and we're looking for the from author using an extended search. Now this is a built-in part of the Enterprise Architect scripting things. We haven't invented this. All we've done is wired it into the enumerables to make it much easier for you to get to. So again, a very powerful thing. Then the other thing is we can look at that even another way, and that is using SQL. So we can inside our enumerable do a from EA SQL, and that way we can just send SQL code to EA to get some answers back. Now this might be a much more efficient thing to do with something like author. Remember, we're not doing anything sinister with the SQL. You know, it's a very brave person and a little bit foolish who goes into the database and starts manipulating things with SQL. This is just selecting, it's not updating, and we would absolutely encourage you not to be doing that. You can't do that through this interface anyway, so you can't run SQL updates through here at all. You can only do the updates through enumerables, which eventually ends up with you know, with the Enterprise Architect API code. So you know, lots of let's have a look at this parameter name change, or the change type one here. So here we've got an example of we want to change the type of a parameter. So if you think about your Enterprise Architect repositories, we've got an element, and the element has got methods, operations, and those operations have parameters, and the parameters have types. So you can see with just a few lines of the enumerables code, we're able to do something quite powerful. So we're going to change the type. Let's have a look at that in an example. So let's go here again to our friend find in all diagrams. We've got our test rig mapping. Go back to that again. We've seen this before. And change parameter type. There it is there, and it's using test rig number 7. So let's go. That's the name, that's the type. Yeah, both of them are using that. So let's go to that and find in the browser window. There it is, and let's just check that it's in the right state. I'll just see that before we there's our operations before we run it. Here's our features window. Let's just go and have a look. This is just preliminary things to go. Okay, those are char and float. So let's go back to our test rig here. Let's make sure our output is here. I'm going to clear this window, but it's actually going to go to number 1. I'll clear that. We can put clears in, use the console.clear. I don't think we've done that in this particular method. So let's choose our test rig, and we've got a number of classes here with different things in them. So, you know, let's have a look and see again what operations. There's a few chars in there. They're all chars. Let's have a look and see what happens when we run our cookbook. So what we're running on is an element, and we're looking at methods, and we're looking at parameters, and we're saying we're going to change the type. So let's run that, and that looked like it ran too quickly. So let's see whether something actually happened. Changing the parameters, found A12 and B12, so it's found those ones. Let's go back and look at those. Class A12, it's changed those to a string, which is what it was reported to do, and the other one that it was supposed to do was B1. So based on the particular parameters, it's changing those things. So remember that we had the parameters where it was type char and the author was Isaac Newton. So the other authors weren't Isaac Newton in the other cases. This one was Albert Einstein, and this one was Isaac Newton, but there's it's not the right. It doesn't meet some other condition. So let's having had a look at that, let's go back to our presentation and move forward a little bit. A quick history of how we arrived in that. In about the year 2000, we were very early adopters. We live in the same region as Jeffrey Sparx. I met Jeffrey Sparx very early on, and you know, I've seen the tool just grow to amazing strengths, and the amount of functionality and the things that it can do is just amazing, which makes the problem of maintaining repositories even more difficult. In about 2008, we started building proprietary scripts to administer the repositories, and we did that for quite a few years. In 2014, we started using some sophisticated exploring tree walkers and graph algorithms to facilitate the increasing demands. Now, these became quite difficult. I found that my programming skills, which were sharp at one stage, but as I took on other roles, they became more blunt, and I found it quite difficult to understand the very complex algorithms. In 2018, a developer that had been working with us, who is a senior developer who's now retiring, Ian Hogan, came to me with this example of the enumerables, and he sent it to me one Friday afternoon, and for the first time I went, wow, this is incredible. I can understand this code easily, and I can change it. And I understand what's going on. I have a mathematics background, so walking trees and graphs and things was quite natural to me. And then 2021, we began to productize the code base and build up a rich set of examples. And our intention is to make a vibrant community of requesters, people requesting recipes, and contributors with a wide range of cookbooks. So, as I said, dinner party cookbooks, Mediterranean food, American, traditional food, all sorts of things. This is the execution pyramid. We'll go through this quickly. You can look at it yourself in the presentation. Enterprise Architect is the base where all of the information is residing. There's a JavaScript engine. Enumerable sits on top of that, and then the repository extension framework sits on top of the enumerables. Your recipes and your work will sit on top of the ref. So there's lots of layers there. Why is this all happening? Well, one of the reasons it's happening is because Prolaborate came along and started making some noise in the world. Essentially, people started getting access to information in the models in a way that was pleasing to them, in a way that suited them. So, it's a very welcomed addition to the Sparx product ecosystem, but it means that there's lots of users that have come along. WebEA is another tool that also gives people exposure to the model, and the ProCloud server is there behind driving the whole thing. Now, modeling information is being accumulated all the time. Enterprise Architect is the great accumulator and equalizer, and you can see here all sorts of things that can go into the repository, and a better position to be in here. Obviously, there are some other tools like Jira and SharePoint that have their purpose, and we're not saying that those things should be incorporated into the repository, but they can be linked to through the extensions. But this imported content needs to be synthesized, and the elements that are brought into the repository from the extensions, the Jira stories, the SharePoint documents, they all need to be synthesized. And adding things like annual cost to a catalog of imported application components, that's a kind of quite typical thing that people want to do. So we're reaching this wider audience. Now, there are more than 30 integrations that Enterprise Architect has, and Prolaborate has a number itself. I've only put one on this diagram because, frankly, it would just get too busy. But the summary of it is that the repository information is now reaching a much wider audience, and this means that repositories need to be refactored and new elements imported and linked. And being able to do this in an ordered, repeatable, and well-managed way is critical to success. Now, with the model add-ins versus the scripts, we can version control the scripts. We can run code bases that are much more rigorous than you do with scripting. As I said before, the scripting has absolutely got its purpose, and we still use it. But to be doing serious manipulations of models, it's best to be using the add-ins, and it's best in our mind to be using something like the ref. Let's have a quick look at these. I'm not going to spend time on this. We lost a bit of time earlier, but here's a bit of a background of the stakeholders and drivers and the motivation for what we're doing. The uptake of Enterprise Architect as a modeling tool is increasing. Extended reach, we talked about that. Increasing extensions to other tools, increase in imported content, and the need to manipulate models. You may see yourself as one of those stakeholders in there. Let's quickly have I'm just going to jump back to the model, and I'm going to show you just part of where our modeling is going on, so you can see how we've arrived at this solution. So some of the constraints, let's just take a quick look at the constraints, and we won't worry about looking at the other things. But these constraints really gave my colleague Ian the framework to arrive at the solution. it must allow existing EA syntax to be used. We had a developer that that went down a different path and wrapped everything up with framework methods, but that meant that people couldn't use the repository. People that would have to learn a whole new way of doing things. So this was critical to the new direction. And making mistakes, going down the wrong path is it's a really important part of learning. And we're no different to any other development place. We make mistakes and we learn from them. Hopefully, it must be based on an open source libraries. So that's the link.js. It must be flexible and intuitive. It must handle mathematical graphs and trees, and must handle sets of items. So it does all of those things. We've got other principles that we can look at, and goals and drivers and stakeholders. But let's just flick back to our presentation and move on. We've looked at some relatively trivial examples, and we need to get an understanding of what the product's doing. So I make no apologies for that. Hopefully you can see from those simple examples the power of what it can do. Here's a much more a much more sort of field example, if you like. Someone's got an existing Archimate model. Now, they may have been working with Archimate 2 and then version 3, and they've got a model. We've deliberately just used driver A, capability A. It makes it much easier for our test beds to work. So we've got this model, and Prolaborate's come along, and I think there were some sessions on application portfolios, for example, which is an important thing in enterprise architecture. Some of you who work in that space, and the lingua franca, or the common language that people use, is Archimate. But Archimate is a very syntactically poor language and a semantically poor language. They've deliberately created it like that. It's not. I'm not casting aspersions on the language, but it's not as rich as UML. So one of the important things is to be able to enrich the language. Now, up at the top of the screen here, this is the model that someone's got, an existing Archimate model. And then up at the top of the screen, we've got an Archimate application component, which we've specialized into our own component using Enterprise Architect's built-in profile mechanism. Now, suddenly, the people who are using Prolaborate, the business people, the non-modeling community that get such value out of that tool, suddenly that they want to see things like, what was the upfront cost of the application? What's the annual cost? What's the vendor? What's the lifecycle status, security, strategic class, the technical owner, the operational date, the decommission date, the business owner? All of this can be visualized through EA as well, but can reach a greater audience with Prolaborate. So, and this is the result. We're going to convert this. This is something that comes up all the time. It's something that it crosses for many customers. It crosses the path when we're doing consulting work. This is something that we have to do first. We develop a profile. We figure out how the people want it visualized in Prolaborate, and then we construct the application component. This is a relatively simple one. In real life, it's probably going to be a little bit more complex, but it shows you. There's the annual cost. You can see that. And the upfront cost was 22,000, 7,000. We've got our business owners and things. Let's now dive into this and have a look at converting the profile as a sort of a richer example. So we're going to look at a different cookbook, and we've just started this cookbook, and there's going to be a profiles cookbook. And here we can see that we can convert from Archimate, from BPMN, from DMN, from CMM, from SysML, all sorts of different things that we can convert from, with the intention of adding the extra elements. So let's have a look at that cookbook, and that was cookbook number 4. And if we go back to let's close all of these things for a minute, close all, and we'll go back to our home diagram, and we'll navigate to the cookbooks. So we go to cookbooks. It's in a theme. I think it's in theme 1. And it's cookbook 4. Let's have a look at that. Drill down into the model, and let's have a look at this one. We'll go edit internal code, and we've got that there. Now, this one is a little bit different. Here we've got our enumerables. This time we call a function convert to profile, and we also do action further up. That's simply that simply calls a method. So we don't have to just stay in this enumerables thing. We can launch out into a method. And here this method is quite simply going to convert the profile from a Archimate one. And I'm not going to go into the details of this code, but let's have a look again at running this as an example. And so let's go here again and look for related elements. Whoopsie daisy, not that. Find in all diagrams. Could have gone that one, but it's easier to go through this one. Find in all diagrams. Cookbook 4 test rig mappings. There it is. There, it's the architecture one. Let's go and have a look at that. Find in the project browser. Here it is. Here. Let's have a quick look at the diagram, and we'll see that all these elements. That's the diagram we had in our picture, and you can see that they're in the stereotype in the properties window. You can see they're all Archimate. So let's run our script on that, and we can see in the application component that we don't have any attributes like we wanted. We wanted, you know, cost. They're not built-in attributes, and we need to add them. So just before we do that, we're going to look at our we'll just look at our profiles. We have a profile built in here, and this is the profile that we'll be converting to. So I'll have a quick little look at that. We looked at it in the screen. Here's our application component, and we've implemented that profile, and we're going to convert this model. So we'll go back to our test rig, wherever it was, test rig 15, and we'll run the convert program. Again, looking at our output window, making sure that we're there. I'll make a little bit more room, and it was cookbook number 4, and let's clear that output for a minute, and let's go convert. I'll just go back and make sure I've got that selected. And let's go cookbook 4, convert, and from Archimate. It does the work. Let's go back into our diagram and look at our application component. And here we see now we've got it converted to have decommission date. We can, you know, put that date into some time in the future using all of these things. Now, these are built into Enterprise Architect. We didn't create these. These are just part of the Enterprise Architect thing. The lifecycle status, let's choose, we're implementing it, and we can put in upfront costs and things. So that's a richer world example, but you can see again that the code, you know, the code is actually quite trivial. So let's go back to our presentation. I'm moving along a bit quickly because we lost a little bit of time earlier on. We lost about 10 minutes. This was our first example. We've covered that a little bit. I'm not going to go back over that. Lambda expressions, they're pretty key. If you look in this thing, lambda expressions come up all the time. All they are is simply collapsed. Really think about them as collapsed methods that can't have variables and things in them. And we can send 2 parameters there, so you can see this one here where we're doing something with connectors and the element that's the supplier end of the connector or the target end of the connector. I won't cover those. Template literals, we spoke about that a little bit, but you know, here they are again here. So the syntax becomes debunked. You know, we're able to kind of look through the syntax, and suddenly it becomes very understandable. And I remember when this engineer first came to me, it was a bit daunting. And you know, I thought, well, I didn't have a modern programming background. I've spent the last couple of years going back and very enjoyably picking up a lot more of the modern programming skills. I used to run a big R&D center, so I have a strong programming background. But you know, like a lot of us that have got into modeling, it's got a little bit rusty. But I've really enjoyed getting back into it and using these new ways of doing things. Let's have a quick look. This is what the enumerables is doing. It's moving down through the tree. So I'm not going to go into this in detail, but you can see that, you know, packages contain other packages that contain elements that contain other elements, and then they come down to children. And that can go on infinitum. I'm going to jump over these things here. These are the collections that we support. All of these collections, you know, tests and resources, metrics, all of those things, and method connections. You saw us update a parameter from the element. We got the methods, we got the parameter, we got the types. We updated that in about, you know, 5 lines of code. Receptions and signals, I'm going to forget. This is part of the add-in model, and you know, this is what makes model add-in so powerful, because you can use there are all sorts of model add-in events and broadcast events, so very, very powerful. JavaScript console, we implement that, so lots of things there. I'm going to skip over these slides about graphs. You can look at them in your own time. But I want to just talk about this postman model of lazy execution. So when we have an enumerable here in this top example here, it's like the postman's planning the route. Nothing actually happens. The postman's planning his route, but actually hasn't executed it. It's only when you do a log, a force, or a do action, or a for each, that the enumerable gets forced. So this is him actually delivering, or her delivering the mail. This is the force and the log create the execution. That's like the postman moving along. So here we have another example. I won't go into this one, but we can do the do action thing along the way there as well. So that's another richer example. A peek under the hood. The code I've shown you is the code that recipe writers will write. This is the code that developers will write underneath the hood, the prototype functions or the things that underpin all of this. And again, we can look at this a bit later. Comparison to SQL. Superficially, the languages look similar, but they are actually different in the way that they execute. So I'm just going to talk about now about this community. Our vision is to create a community of model administrators, librarians, power modelers who want to become part of our teams to create recipes. So there's kind of three different levels. Technical developers, we are looking to get some technical developers who have got the right skills to help develop that back end further. And then recipe creators. So, you know, good JavaScript developers, good API knowledge. So there'll be lots of you who probably fit into that category. And then recipe requesters, people who just want a recipe that does something for them. To do that, we've tried to commercialize this in a way that keeps the costs down. We've got our plan is to have a personal and a professional and a corporate version of the product. At the moment, what we're saying to people is, please, if you're interested in this product and interested in seeing it develop, please join us as a catalyst. The price is, really quite low. That's just going to seed some, our ability to employ a developer to do some work, and that then will feed into recipes. The forum will allow us to have lots more people contributing recipes, and then people voting on them, people answering those recipe questions. So that's what if you're interested in joining, we'd love to see you join as a catalyst, and that will give you, access to the to any early versions, contributing recipes. Your name as a contributor would be written into the recipe, an early feature release. So that's where we're at. I want to say thank you to one and all for joining, and apologise for the technical delay we had in the beginning. So I've had to move through things a little bit more quickly. And a special thanks to Nizam, Dewey, and the Prolaborate team for organising the summit. It's a wonderful thing, and I'll hand back over to Dewey now.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Thanks, everyone. And as Stephen said, very apologies for the initial disruptions on the session, and I'm sorry, Stephen, to you too. So thank you everyone for attending the session. We have a couple of discussions that need a detailed discussion by you, Stephen. So we'll be pasting those discussions in Sparx Services Australia channel. Please take forward the conversations from there. I think that will be much more space for you to give a detailed explanation to them.
Great. All right. Yeah. Thank you. We'll see you in the we'll see you in the Teams meeting.
In MS Teams. Yeah. Thank you everyone for your time during the session. So now, as said, Stephen will be available in MS Teams to have elaborated discussions and answer further questions. The link to Microsoft Teams is pasted in the chat window for your quick reference. Also, kindly note that the recording of this video will be available in eaglobalsummit.com with complete Q&A and discussions portal underneath the video after the summit. We will be notifying you all by email once it is made available. Thank you everyone once again, and thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.